The Nevada desert woke each morning in silence. Wind swept across the flat runways of Summit Valley Airfield Museum, carrying fine dust that shimmered in the early light. To the tourists who came on weekends, it was just an old relic yard of planes and hangars. But to Captain Raymond Cole, it was the last living chapter of his life. He arrived every morning before dawn, the way he used to when he was still active duty. His truck, a faded blue Ford from the 90s, always parked in the same spot outside Hangar 3. Inside, the air smelled of hydraulic oil, metal polish, and memory. He would flip the same two switches, open the skylight vents, and begin his quiet ritual, inspecting, adjusting, and calibrating the VX-9 Falcon, a scaled experimental jet he had been rebuilding for years. The model wasn't large, 8 feet from nose to tail, but it carried the soul of something far greater. The real Falcon had been designed under his supervision in 1983, during a classified program that was eventually shelved. Budget cuts, politics, and a new generation of engineers had buried it before it ever flew. Cole never argued. He simply archived the blueprints, retired, and built this model on his own dime. Every bolt, every rivet, every curvature on the wing was cut by his hand. He worked with slow precision, the way a craftsman tunes a violin, knowing it might be his final song. People noticed him, but not in the way one hopes to be noticed. Young staffers passed by his hangar, whispering half smiles. That old guy still thinks he's in the Air Force. He's tuning a museum piece, not a drone. He heard them, every word, but never responded. His silence made some uncomfortable. To others, it was invisible. Only Mr. Ortega, the janitor, greeted him kindly. "Mornin', Captain. You're earlier than the sun again." Cole would nod, reply, "The sky waits for no one, son," then return to work. By noon, the desert heat would shimmer across the airstrip. Cole's skin was bronzed and creased, his movements deliberate and steady. He was preparing for something important, a private test flight he had been arranging with the museum director, Linda Brooks. She was reluctant but respected his service record. "Just be careful, Ray," Shed said. "You know how these boards react when they hear the word test." Cole smiled faintly. "It's only a scale model, Linda. The risk's smaller than their imagination." He wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. He simply wanted closure, a proper flight for the design that had haunted him for 40 years. That afternoon, he stood alone beside the Falcon, resting on its launch cart. The wings gleamed under the sun, silver and clean. Head checked the controls twice, fuel mix once. The radio transmitter, though decades old, responded with its familiar tone. He took off his cap, looked up at the empty sky, and exhaled. "Let's give her one more run," he said softly. From the museum's observation deck, a few staff members lingered to watch. Ethan Ward, the young engineer, folded his arms with quiet amusement. "Has really doing it manually? No autopilot?" Miles shrugged. "Old habits die hard." Cole throttled up. The miniature jet roared, a sound too strong for its size. Dust lifted. The wings trembled, then steadied. Within seconds, the Falcon was airborne, slicing the air with perfect balance. It climbed steadily, sunlight flashing off its polished spine. For a moment, everything was right again. The years, the doubts, the silence washed away by the sound of flight. Cole's eyes followed it upward, hands firm on the controller. Altitude nominal, pitch stable, radio clear. Then the signal flickered. A faint static hissed through the speaker. He adjusted the frequency, tapped the knob, frowned slightly. The receiver buzzed once, then twice, and then nothing. The signal cut like a thread. The small plane veered east, wobbled, and vanished behind the ridge. No explosion, no plume of dust. Just gone. Cole stood still. He didn't shout, didn't panic. He simply lowered the controller and stared at the horizon. To him, it wasn't failure, it was departure. He whispered something no one heard, placed the controller on the table, and walked toward his truck. Behind him, confusion erupted. Miles ran to the radio shack, yelling about lost connection. Ethan muttered, "Told you. Analog junk never holds up." Linda Brooks rushed out from the office, scanning the ridge for smoke. There was none. By the time they reached the edge of the runway, the wind had already erased the tracks. Only Cole's footprints remained 2 lines leading back to his hangar, then nothing. Inside, the workspace was spotless. Tools arranged with military order. His flight log open to a single sentence. Every design deserves one honest chance at the sky. They called local search units that evening, but with no signal, no debris, and no crash report, it was classified as a lost equipment incident. The board quietly suspended experimental permissions for private restorations. Paperwork closed within 48 hours. When Ethan returned 2 days later to check Hangar, a red sticker had been placed on the door. Access revoked. Through the small window, dust floated like slow snow over empty tables. Cole's truck was gone. No one saw him leave. Linda filed a missing person report out of respect, but there was little to follow. No family nearby, no digital trail. Just one veteran, one model jet, and a silence that grew heavier with each sunset. Rumors spread through the staff. Some said Head left for Arizona, others that Head gone off-grid entirely. Only Ortega, the janitor, refused to speculate. He still brought coffee every morning, leaving it by the locked hangar door. Just in case the captain comes back, Head say quietly. Weeks passed. The hangar became part of the background again, another relic among relics. But every evening, as the sun dipped low, the last light would hit the metal letters of his nameplate still bolted to the door. R. Cole. Flight. Ops. And for a brief moment, the brass would glow as if remembering. Out in the desert, the wind carried faint echoes, something like the hum of a small engine fading into distance. No one could tell if it was real or just memory playing tricks. Inside the museum, life went on, new projects, new drones, new young faces convinced they understood the sky. But somewhere, beyond the ridgeline, beneath layers of sand and silence, something waited a message unfinished, a flight not yet complete. And thus, Captain Raymond Cole, once test pilot, now forgotten craftsman, passed quietly from conversation. No memorial, no announcement, only a line on a maintenance log. Falcon test incomplete, operator unavailable. The world had moved on. But the airfield remembered. A week passed since Captain Raymond Cole's disappearance. The desert had already swallowed the last of his tracks, and inside Summit Valley Airfield Museum, life went on with quiet indifference. Maintenance schedules resumed, drones were tested, visitors came and went. Only the sealed hangar at the far end of the tarmac stood untouched, a locked box holding the silence of a man who once spoke only through engines. Ethan Ward walked past it every morning on his way to the new testing bay. He was 27, bright, ambitious, and impatient with anything that smelled of the past. In his world, efficiency meant automation, and skill meant code. To him, Cole's disappearance was tragic but unsurprising. Analog dreams don't last long in a digital world, he told a coworker, half joking. But that morning, his supervisor stopped him in the hallway. Ward, the board wants Cole's hangar cleared. His equipment, notes, whatever's in there, catalog it, and move it to storage. You'll handle it. Ethan hesitated. You sure you don't want Ortega for that? Ortega's too sentimental. You're practical. Do it by Friday. By noon, Ethan stood before the red-sealed door. The sign read, Access revoked. Property of Summit Valley Foundation. He broke the seal, the paper tearing like a thin whisper. When the door swung open, the air that came out was cold, dry, and faintly metallic, a scent of oil and years of devotion. Dust floated through beams of light slicing down from the vents. Everything was in order, too much order. Every wrench aligned by size, each label written in tidy block letters. Cole's world hadn't been chaotic. It had been disciplined, deliberate. It felt wrong to touch anything. Ethan started with the workbench. Stacked manuals, a logbook, a photograph of a younger Cole standing beside a real Falcon prototype, grinning slightly. No family photos, no medals on display, just the machine and the sky behind him. Ethan muttered under his breath, Guess some people really marry their work. Still, he couldn't shake a small current of unease. There was something intimate about the place, as if the man had just stepped out for lunch and might walk back in at any minute. In the corner stood a large metal toolbox. Unlike the others, it was closed, locked with an old rotary latch. The initials, R.C., were etched on the lid. He hesitated, then unlatched it. Inside, neatly packed, lay hand tools wrapped in cloth and a folded note taped to the underside of the lid. He peeled it off carefully. The paper had yellowed, but the handwriting was firm and clear. "If the signal dies, follow the echo." Ethan frowned. "What signal? What echo?" He turned the note over, nothing else. Under the tools, buried at the bottom, he found a small device, an analog receiver, the kind used decades ago for aircraft telemetry. A green diode on its panel blinked weakly, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. He plugged it into a power source. The light steadied. Static filled the air, followed by a faint intermittent tone. Beep, pause, beep. Coordinates appeared on the dim screen. Faint, incomplete, but real. Latitude, longitude, both pointing far east of the museum, deep into the desert near a restricted range no one used anymore. Ethan felt a prickling at the back of his neck. He turned off the receiver, then on again. The signal persisted. Cole had left something behind, something alive. He carried the device to his workstation and ran the coordinates through the database. No official record matched the location. No military activity, no airstrip. Just a dead zone of sand and wind. He sat back, arms crossed. Part of him wanted to dismiss it. An old man's superstition, maybe a static loop, but another part whispered that line again. If the signal dies, follow the echo. By evening, he couldn't focus on his assigned tasks. The receiver sat beside him, blinking softly, like an invitation. He looked out the hangar window. The desert stretched endlessly, glowing orange under the sunset. For the first time, Ethan felt something he couldn't explain, a pull. He packed the receiver, grabbed his truck keys, and checked out a company radio for field testing. No one asked questions. The road east was a long, cracked ribbon through emptiness. He drove with the window down, the desert wind burning against his face. The further he went, the weaker the radio signal from town became, until all he could hear was static and the rhythmic beeping from the old receiver. Beep, beep, pause. The sky turned copper, then violet, then black. Stars appeared, endless and sharp. There was no cell signal, no sign of life, only the desert breathing in the dark. At mile marker 86, the beeping quickened. Ethan slowed. The receiver's tone shifted higher, closer. He turned off the engine, stepped out, and listened. The desert was so silent that even the sand seemed to wait. He swept his flashlight across the dunes. Nothing. Then, far off, a flicker, faint, metallic. He climbed over a ridge, heart pounding. Each step sank into sand that whispered beneath his boots. At the bottom of a shallow gully, something glinted. He knelt down. Half buried under a thin layer of sand was a sliver of aluminum, a small, sharp edge like a wingtip. He brushed it carefully, revealing part of a fuselage no longer than his arm, painted silver gray. It wasn't a full plane, just a fragment, but the serial marking was unmistakable. VX-9 Falcon. Ethan froze. He looked around. No tracks, no tire marks, no crater. The piece had landed here softly, as if set down by hand. He checked the coordinates again. They matched perfectly. He ran his fingers along the metal. It was warm from the day's sun, smooth except for a small latch under the cockpit area. Inside, something clicked, a small compartment no bigger than a wallet. Within it lay a rectangular box, black and sealed tight, about the size of a cassette tape. He turned it over. Engraved on the side were words so small he had to use his phone light to read them. Flight recorder. Manual unit. R. Cole. Ethan stared at it, realization washing over him. It wasn't just debris. It was a homemade black box. He sat in the sand, heartbeat thudding in his ears. The desert stretched endless around him, vast and indifferent. Above, the stars looked like cold witnesses. He hesitated, then flipped the switch on the side of the recorder. A hiss of static filled the air, followed by a voice low, calm, deliberate. Falcon test. Manual control stable. Altitude 2 to 300 feet. Wind cross left. Adjusting rudder. Cole's voice. Even through distortion, it carried composure, not fear, not strain, just presence. Ethan swallowed hard. He turned up the volume. Power drop. Recalibrating. If anyone hears this, note that analog still responds faster than your code. A brief chuckle. Then silence. Then wait. I'm reading a return signal. Unidentified aircraft. 12 o'clock high. Falcon 2-1. Do you copy? Say again. Falcon 2-1. This is Cole. The next few seconds were muffled. The faint sound of another engine came through, distant yet distinct. Then a tone, short and clear, the old squadron call sign acknowledgement. Ethan knew enough about Air Force history to recognize it. Falcon 2-1 was the designation for Cole's original unit, disbanded more than 30 years ago. The recording wavered, the static rising like wind over gravel. Then came Cole's final words, quiet but steady. If you hear me, keep the flame alive. Son. The playback ended. Only the desert wind answered. Ethan sat there for a long time, the recorder in his lap, the sand cooling under the night. He felt something inside him shift, not fear, not guilt exactly, but recognition. Head mocked the man, called him obsolete, and yet here, in the middle of nowhere, he heard more clarity in that single voice than in all the data Head ever processed. He whispered to the dark, "You weren't wrong, were you?" The stars didn't move, but they seemed to listen. He placed the recorder back into its compartment, sealed it, and marked the spot on his GPS. Then he stood, brushing sand from his hands, and looked toward the west, the faint glow of the museum lights 100 miles away. The drive back felt slower. He kept the receiver on the passenger seat, its light blinking softly in rhythm with his heartbeat. Each blink reminded him of that line again, follow the echo. When he reached Summit Valley near dawn, the airfield was empty. He parked quietly, locked the receiver in his drawer, and sat for a while before heading home. For the first time in his young career, Ethan Ward didn't feel smarter than those who came before him. He felt smaller in the best, most necessary way. Out on the horizon, the desert wind rose again, carrying dust across the old runway. Some said it sounded like static. Others, like the faint hum of a jet passing overhead. But Ethan knew what it was. It was an echo still alive, still calling. And somewhere beyond that ridge, the sky was keeping a promise. The next morning, the desert was pale and windless. Ethan Ward hadn't slept. He sat in his small rented room across the road from the museum, the black box placed on the table before him like something sacred or forbidden. The old analog receiver blinked beside it, faint green light pulsing slowly, rhythmically. Each blink felt like a heartbeat, not his, but someone else's, still living through metal. He played the recording again, this time through the lab console, letting the room fill with Captain Cole's calm voice. It didn't sound like a man in distress. It sounded like someone reporting from the edge of clarity, as if he knew what he was hearing wasn't meant for anyone else. Power drop. Recalibrating. Unidentified response at 12 o'clock high. Repeating. Falcon 2-1. This is Cole. Then static. Then that sound faint, ghostly. The echo of another aircraft replying from the sky. No logical explanation, not even by modern telemetry standards. Ethan replayed the clip 5 times, marking timestamps, checking frequency ranges. Everything was consistent. No interference patterns typical of static feedback. Whatever Cole had heard and recorded had been real. He exhaled, leaning back. The man had been dismissed as an outdated relic, but his instruments still worked, and his instincts had been sharper than any simulation model. Ethan rubbed his temples. The more he tried to reduce it to science, the less scientific it felt. By 9 a.m., the museum came to life, footsteps echoing on concrete, compressors starting, voices cutting through corridors. Ethan tucked the recorder into his satchel and walked across the yard to Linda Brooks' office. She looked up, surprised. "You're early. Everything cleared from the hangar?" He hesitated. "Mostly. But I found something you might want to see." She frowned. "What kind of something?" Instead of answering, he placed the black box on her desk. The room fell quiet. Linda's eyes softened. Her fingers traced the engraved initials. "Is this from his model?" Ethan nodded. "I found it about 80 miles east. The receiver was still active. It led me there. Linda's breath caught. You went out there alone? He shrugged slightly. Someone had to check. And this was still transmitting. He pressed play. Cole's voice filled the small office clear, steady, alive. When the strange returning signal echoed through the speaker, Linda's eyes widened. She glanced up at Ethan. That's not possible. I know, he said. But it's there. When the final words played, if you hear me, keep the flame alive, son. Linda looked down, blinking hard. She stayed silent for a long moment, before whispering. He used to say something like that when we grounded him. Said a man's work should speak long after the reports are closed. She picked up the phone. I need to make a call. Don't mention this to anyone yet. Within hours, 2 unmarked SUVs arrived at the airfield. Men in plain suits stepped out, showing military credentials, Air Force Historical Command. They didn't shake hands. They didn't smile. They just said, show us the recording. In the control room, they connected the black box to a clean console, recording every byte. One of them, a tall man with close-cropped silver hair, listened without expression. When it ended, he asked one question. Where exactly was this found? Ethan gave the coordinates. The man nodded once, then turned to his partner. Send retrieval. Priority 1. He looked back at Ethan. You'll stay available for questioning. The tone was official, but not hostile. Something in his eyes suggested understanding, maybe even respect. By evening, a convoy of technical vehicles had left the museum, heading toward the desert ridge. Ethan watched from a distance, arms folded, as dust trails rose behind them. It felt strange, as if the quiet integrity of one forgotten man had suddenly bent the machinery of bureaucracy toward truth. Linda approached from behind. They said they're reopening his file. Ethan turned to her. What file? The Falcon project. 1983. He was chief test pilot. They shut it down after he refused to falsify data on the wing load limits. He said the readings were wrong, dangerous. They grounded him, replaced him with a civilian consultant, and buried the report. Ethan looked away. So he was right. Linda nodded slowly. They didn't find out until years later. The crash of the prototype in '86 proved his numbers were correct. But by then, Head retired in silence. Never said a word. Ethan felt his throat tighten. He remembered the old man walking alone by the hangar. Always careful. Always courteous. Head thought that silence was weakness. Now he understood it had been strength. That night, Ethan stayed in the hangar long after closing hours. The technicians had packed up Cole's tools, but he reopened the drawers, arranging them back the way they'd been. He found the old flight log still lying open on the bench, 1 page, 1 sentence. Every design deserves one honest chance at the sky. He read it aloud under his breath. The words carried a weight that filled the empty space. At 10:42 p.m., his phone buzzed an unknown number. He answered. A deep voice on the line said simply, Mr. Ward, this is General Marcus Ellery. I believe you have something that belongs to my Air Force. Ethan straightened instinctively. Yes, sir. The recorder. It's secure. Good. It'll be at Summit Valley by morning. Don't move it. And don't speak of it to anyone else. This matter's about to be set right. The line clicked dead. Sleep never came that night. Ethan sat outside the hangar, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the stars. The desert wind whispered through the metal fences, carrying faint echoes like static fading and returning. He wondered if Cole had heard that same wind on his last night. By dawn, the convoy returned. Dust rolled over the runway as men in military uniforms unloaded crates and secured a perimeter around the main hangar. A helicopter hovered briefly, then landed near the museum tower. From it stepped General Marcus Ellery, tall, poised, his uniform crisp against the morning glare. The sight drew every staff member out of their offices. Linda met him halfway. General, thank you for... He raised a hand gently. Let's skip the formalities. I'm here for Captain Raymond Cole. The air seemed to still. Inside the command room, they played the black box again. This time, through the main audio system. The general stood motionless, listening, his face unreadable. When the returning signal came, the one labeled Falcon 2-1, his jaw tightened slightly. He knew that call sign. Everyone who had served in those years would have. When the recording ended, silence lingered for several long seconds. Then General Ellery spoke, voice low but carrying. Captain Raymond Cole, Air Force Test Division. Refused falsification of data, March 12th, 1983. His warning saved 2 crews later that year. His name was redacted to protect political interests. Today, that ends. He turned to Ethan. You said you found this east of here. Did you find him? Ethan shook his head. Just the wreckage of the model, sir. No trace of him. Ellery nodded slowly. Then well, find him, or what's left of him. He deserves that. He faced the staff gathered outside the glass. Most stood frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing a reprimand or redemption. The general's tone left no doubt. Captain Cole's integrity cost him his career, but it preserved the lives of men he never met. That's not failure. That's the kind of success history forgets to write until someone listens. His eyes shifted toward Ethan, and someone finally listened. Ethan didn't know what to say. He just nodded, unable to meet the general's gaze for long. Ellery clapped him once on the shoulder, firm, not heavy. Stay close, son. You're part of this now. By noon, recovery teams were already en route to the coordinates. Helicopters swept low over the desert ridge. From the museum roof, Ethan watched the operation unfold, small figures moving through sand, digging, photographing, logging coordinates. It was strange watching the desert, once indifferent, now stirred to life because one quiet man had chosen not to lie. Linda joined him on the roof, holding 2 cups of coffee. He used to sit right there, she said, pointing toward the runway's edge. Said the air smelled different before a test flight, like it knew something big was coming. Ethan took the cup. Maybe he knew too. She smiled faintly. Maybe. A radio call crackled through the comms tower. Base, this is Retrieval 1. We've found something vehicle, partially buried. Old pickup truck, blue. Registration matches Cole. Requesting confirmation. Everyone on the roof went still. Ethan's heart slowed. The general's voice came through the open channel, steady. Proceed with care. Confirm occupant. 5 minutes later, the reply arrived. Occupant located. 1 male, deceased. Seatbelt fastened. Peaceful posture. Transmitter still in hand. No one spoke. The wind moved through the antennas, soft and low. The general removed his cap, lowering his head. Copy, he said quietly. Then, almost to himself, welcome home, Captain. For a long moment, the airfield was utterly still. The world had just learned how silence could speak louder than anything else. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, the convoy returned, headlights stretched like a solemn procession. The recovered pickup led the way, draped with an American flag. Behind it, technicians carried a single metal case, the model Falcon's remains. Ethan stood by the gate as they passed. He didn't salute. He simply placed his hand over his chest. Some gestures don't need training. Later that night, the general asked for one thing. The hangar reopened, just for 1 hour. Inside, under the dim yellow lights, they placed the model on the workbench where Cole had built it. The tools were returned to their exact order, and for that 1 hour, no one spoke. The hum of the ceiling fan and the ticking of the clock were the only sounds. It felt, somehow, like the air itself had bowed its head. Outside, the desert wind rose again, sweeping dust along the runway. To anyone passing, it might have sounded like static, or maybe like a distant aircraft passing overhead. But to those who had heard the recording, it was something else entirely. It was the echo. 3 days after the recovery, Summit Valley Airfield fell quiet again, not with indifference this time, but with reverence. The hangars were closed to the public. The press had been notified of a private military memorial. No details were released, no footage allowed. Yet somehow, word had spread. By sunrise, a line of cars stretched from the museum gate to the highway, people standing silently beside them, hats pressed to their chests. They didn't know every detail. They didn't have to. They knew enough that an old pilot, long forgotten, had flown his last mission alone, and that someone had finally listened. Inside Hangar 3, the air smelled of polished steel and dusted memory. A single American flag hung behind the VX-9 Falcon model, now restored and set upon the original launch cart. Its broken wing had been replaced. The scratches along the fuselage had been left untouched, per General Ellery's request. "Let the truth show," Head said. Rows of chairs faced the small stage at the front. The honor guard stood motionless, uniforms crisp, rifles gleaming. The air held that kind of silence only found in places where respect outweighs sound. Ethan Ward sat near the back, hands clasped, head bowed. He hadn't slept much since the discovery. The image of Cole's pickup, half buried under the sand, haunted him. But so did something else, that final line from the recording. "If you hear me, keep the flame alive." Linda Brooks took the seat beside him. Her eyes were red but steady. "You did the right thing, Ethan," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "He did. I just showed up late." At precisely 9 o'clock, General Marcus Ellery entered the hangar. Everyone rose. He wore full dress blues, ribbons aligned, white gloves in hand. But there was nothing performative in his bearing. He moved like a man carrying something heavy, the kind of weight only truth can give. He approached the podium and stood for a long moment before speaking. His voice, when it came, was calm and deliberate, filling the space without force. Captain Raymond Cole served this nation with honor from 1968 to 1985. He flew 37 test missions, logged over 2,000 hours in classified prototypes, and refused one thing in his career: to lie. For that refusal, he was grounded. For that integrity, he was forgotten. No one moved. The general's eyes swept the hangar from the young engineers standing near the back to the veterans in faded jackets up front. 3 days ago, his final work was recovered, along with a message recorded moments before his passing. In that message, Captain Cole reminded us that truth, like flight, cannot be programmed. It must be earned every single time. He turned slightly toward the flag-draped table. Beside it lay the small black box, its casing polished, engraved with Cole's name. The general rested his gloved hand on it. This man did not demand recognition. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He built, he served, and he stayed silent when silence cost him everything. That is what makes him greater than those who judged him. A faint ripple moved through the crowd, a collective exhale that sounded almost like grief, almost like pride. Ellery continued. "Effective immediately, Captain Raymond Cole's record will be restored in full. The Falcon project is hereby recognized as a foundation of modern flight safety, and in his name, we establish the Cole Protocol, a program dedicated to training young engineers in the principles of integrity and manual test control. No algorithm will ever replace conscience." He paused. Because conscience was the instrument he mastered best. The honor guard shifted. 2 soldiers stepped forward, folding the flag from Cole's pickup truck. They handed it to the general, who held it tightly for a long moment before lowering his gaze. He walked down the aisle. People stood as he passed. When he reached Ethan, he stopped, extended the folded flag. "He left no family," Ellery said quietly, "but he left a witness. Take this, son, and remember, following the echo isn't just about finding where the signal ends. It's about carrying it forward." Ethan's throat tightened. He accepted the flag, fingers trembling slightly. "Sir, I don't deserve this." The general smiled faintly. Neither did he. "That's why it matters." He moved on, leaving Ethan frozen, flag pressed against his chest. The ceremony closed with a moment of silence, no speeches, no applause. Only the hum of the air conditioner, the faint creak of uniforms, the steady rhythm of breath. When it ended, the crowd dispersed slowly, speaking in low tones, the way people do when leaving church. Outside, the desert sun had risen high, bleaching the tarmac white. Ethan stayed behind. He walked toward the workbench where the model Falcon rested. The tools lay arranged exactly as Cole had left them, wrenches lined by size, pencils sharpened, the old logbook open to the same final page. He ran his hand over the words again. "Every design deserves one honest chance at the sky." He stood there for a long time, the sound of distant rotors fading into the horizon. By late afternoon, the museum reopened. Reporters came, respectful but eager. They filmed the new exhibit unveiled at the main hall, the Cole Protocol. Integrity under silence. Inside the glass display case, the black box sat beside a single wrench, its handle worn smooth. A small plaque read, "Recovered 2025 Summit Valley Airfield. Captain Raymond Cole, USAF, Ret." His silence taught us to listen. Ethan watched visitors pass by, some stopping to read, others just standing still for a while before moving on. No one spoke loudly. Even children lowered their voices, as if instinctively sensing that this wasn't just an exhibit, it was a memory, breathing quietly. In the weeks that followed, the story spread: newspapers, local broadcasts, online features. Each told it differently, but the message stayed the same. A forgotten pilot, a found recording, a truth restored. Letters began arriving at the museum from veterans, engineers, even students. They thanked the staff for honoring a man who never asked to be honored. The board approved funding for scholarships under the Cole Protocol. Young engineers began their first training cycle, part manual, part ethics. On the wall of the new classroom hung a single photograph of Cole, standing beside the real Falcon prototype, sun in his eyes, expression steady. At the bottom of the photo, in plain print, "Integrity is flight without altitude." 1 month later, near sunset, Ethan parked his truck at the edge of the same ridge where Head found the model. The desert wind was warm, carrying the smell of dust and rain. He climbed the slope, holding the folded flag under his arm. At the top he paused. The landscape stretched endlessly, soft gold under the fading light. He knelt, placed the flag on a small stone outcrop, and whispered, "Sir." They listened. The wind rose, lifting a swirl of sand that shimmered in the low sun. For a second, he thought he heard it again, the faint hum of an engine high above, cutting through the stillness. Maybe it was imagination, maybe not. He smiled, looking toward the horizon, where the sky turned to fire, then to blue, then to night. The air was quiet, but not empty. It carried something, a presence, a peace. He turned back toward the truck, the stars already blinking to life overhead. As he drove away, the radio in the dashboard crackled, once a burst of static, then silence. But for a moment, within that static, Ethan thought he heard a voice, steady, composed, unmistakably human. "Falcon 2-1, cleared for final approach." He smiled again. "Roger that, Captain," he said softly. Then the sound faded, leaving only the hum of the tires on the road, and the echo of a man who had taught the world that dignity doesn't need witnesses, only time. And somewhere beyond the desert, in a sky that never forgot his name, Captain Raymond Cole flew again, not in memory, but in meaning.